In the previous lessons we focused mainly on the ZW CAD tools, and we covered this rather quickly. The great thing about these video tutorials is that you can re-watch them at any time if you are having difficulty understanding something. But the CAD concepts that we have learnt are very important to understand before applying them to our jewelry design. But in this lesson we'll be moving on to some of our JCD Lite tools. We'll be learning about parveing surfaces, placing prongs, cutters, bringing in special gemstones, and also taking a look at our bill of materials. So let's create a new file. We're going to create a generic file. Okay, so in our lessons so far, we have taken a look at most of our shape commands, apart from our more complicated morphing commands. In our freeform tab, we have not yet looked at these commands. Though these are useful, they may be best explained when we come to use them in an actual design. We have learnt about our wireframe tab, and our other tabs and commands we will be learning about as and when we need them during our designing. So now we're going to be taking a look at our jewelry tools, our JCD Lite tools. We are first going to look at the Jewelry Counter Design Studio for the Lite version. So in here we have a bunch of pre-made designs. Now this is a pretty new feature to Jewelry CAD Dream, so we can expect this library to expand and be updated. Now Lite has a limited version of this library of components compared to the full version of Jewelry CAD Dream. However, it is still a useful tool for making some shanks and basic rings, and the great thing about it is we have full control over the designs. We can modify and customize them as we see fit. So we're going to come into the Ring Templates tab. And in here we have some pre-made sketches, but we also have many pre-made shanks. Now if we left click on one of these designs, it may take us into a new carousel where we can select the design that we want. So we can scroll through here, looking at all the different pre-made shanks that we have. And when we find one we like, we can place it within our 3D environment. For standard orientation, use the top datum. So we left click to pick that datum. You see it's been picked in our point field. Then we confirm the operation, and we have our ring shank thrown in. So this is brought in as a component. Now we have already seen how to make a shank manually using our ring shank sketches, and then either revolving the sketch or lofting them about the template curves. But here we have an easy way to get that same shanks being the basis for many of our designs. Now like I said, this is brought in as a component, so if you remember, we can enter into our component history by double clicking on the component with our entity filter set to component. We can right click, edit part, and this takes us in to that component history, and then we can exit back out into our part level using this exit icon. So I'm going to bring in a block just so we can distinguish between our two levels. So let's enter into our ring shank history. And you can see how our 3D environment changes appearance. Here we have our ring shank history. And now something I haven't showed you yet is our attributes. Now all components are brought in with attributes. Our attributes can be accessed by coming into the attributes drop down menu, navigating to part. Then we left click on our driving parameters tab, and these are all of our driving parameters, our dimensions for this particular component. And we can play around with these. We can make modifications by typing in a value, left clicking apply, and then our ring shank is going to update to these values. Okay, so most components that we bring in will have dimensions of some kind that we can modify. Now these are very useful features, and we will see how they can apply to our actual designing, where we can add variables to our designs, and then we can bring them into this panel, and we can make modifications to our designs in this manner. Okay, so the designs that we make, we can assign variables and modify them like we are doing with this ring shank component. Okay, so we'll cancel out of this. Now we are making changes to our component here within the component history. Okay, we can also make changes to the component, to these parameters, from within our part level. Okay, so within our designing level. And this is the preferable way to go, because it will add that modification into our history. Okay, because when we go to regenerate, okay, we'll be prompted sometimes with this box. We must left click yes, and this is going to reset our component. Okay, so we need to add our modifications within this environment so they're added in to our history. And to do this, we come into our Tools and Cutters tab, and we're going to be using our tweak command. Now I've mentioned this briefly before. Our tweak command allows us to make tweaks or modifications to components. So when we left click on the command, we're then prompted to pick a component. Okay, we left click to pick the component, then we must select the component in our editor panel, left click, and this is going to bring up all of our dimensions and variables for that component. Okay, and we can make modifications from here. Okay, so we're changing the dimensions and then left clicking apply to apply them to our component, and we should see a preview of these changes. We can then confirm the operation. These changes will come into effect and we will see the tweak added to our history. If we replay our history now, our component is brought in and then our tweak is carried out on that component. Okay, so you can see how these attributes make for good customizable models, and we'll be taking a look at our variables, adding variables in a future lesson. So now I'm going to delete this block from the history. And we're going to be taking a look at some of our special gemstones. Okay, so first of all I'm going to copy some datums. And I'll copy these again in the X direction. Okay, so I'm just bringing in some datums that we can place our gemstones on. Okay, so in the Gems and Settings tab, we've seen our Place Stones command. Okay, to place our gemstones in our designs. Okay, and these gemstones are all scalable according to three variables: the length, the width, and the depth of them. Okay, so they can have three different dimensional values. Our emerald again has three: length, width, depth. Okay, now we have some special gemstones, the Tapered Baguette and the Emerald Creator. And each of these, instead of having three scalable dimensions, they have four-dimensional values instead. So when we left click, let's start off on the Tapered Baguette. If we left click on this command, we get our materials window pop up, where we can choose our stone type. Okay, we can then place our stone at a point in space, and now in the options panel you see we have 4 different fields for the dimensions of the stone. Okay, we can make modifications to the length, to the top width, to the bottom width, okay, and also to the depth. We also have our elevation and rotation fields. Okay, so here is our tapered baguette. Let's place another one. Okay, so you can see that we have 4 different variables on this stone. And the same with the emerald creator. Okay, we can create emeralds, but this time we have control over the length, width, corner, and the depth. Okay, our regular emerald, we have control only over the length, width, and depth. Okay, and the corner is scaled according to them. But with the emerald creator, we have full control over the corner. Okay, we also have our elevation, rotation fields. Okay, so we can modify the length, width, depth, and our corner. So we pick a point and then we make our modifications. Okay, so that is our tapered baguette and emerald creator, our special stone creators. Okay, so in this panel we have our gems, our gem commands, and also our setting commands. Okay, setting our stones. Now we've already seen the bezel command, where we can place a bezel on our stones. Okay, we have a tapered baguette bezel here that we can place. We can rotate it, and then we can update our dimensions to fit with the stone. Okay, so if I remember correctly, this tapered baguette had a length of 8 mm, top width of 6, and bottom width of 3. Okay, and then we left click preview to see the preview of our bezel. Okay, so we also have an emerald bezel, okay, and this will give us control over the corner. So we place it on the same datum as the stone, give it the same rotation, okay, and this one looks like it's almost there already. Let's just change our gem corner to 1 mm. Okay, and now our bezel matches up with our stone. Okay, but also in this settings tab we have under bezel settings and wire settings. Okay, also our halo setting, which I'll show at a later time. So at under bezel, we can add an under bezel to some stones. And we do this in the same way as with a bezel, a normal bezel. Okay, let me see if I can remember these dimensions correctly. Okay, so that looks about a good fit. Maybe a little bit small. So we can look at our preview and make adjustments. Okay, so this is our under bezel. Place another under bezel. Navigate to the stone type in the carousel. Let's place our emerald under bezel. Flipping between the wireframe and shaded modes here. Okay, we need to make changes to the corner. The gem, the width, let's bring it in slightly. Okay. Okay, so finally we have our wire setting. Okay, this works in the same way as the bezel and under bezel. We pick the appropriate wire setting for our stone, and then we place it on the same datum plane as our stone. Okay, this one we need to rotate it. We use our rotation in the options panel. So we use a 90-degree rotation. Okay, the length and width of the bezel seem fine. But if we look here, we can see that these wires, these prongs, are not in the correct position because they are being cut into by the gemstone by quite a significant amount. Okay, and this would make the prongs weak if we were to manufacture this. They would likely snap with this amount of material removed from them. So we can come in, play around with our parameters. Now there's many here. If you're not sure of what a parameter does, then try moving it a little and seeing its effect on the wire setting. Okay, so in this case we want to move these prongs, these wires out. So we're using our prong nudge top. Okay, so we're nudging them out a bit. Okay, let's nudge the bottom as well. Okay, now we can see that our prongs are not being cut into so much, but we could still improve on this. Let's change our bezel length below the girdle. Okay, this is going to bring it up here. Maybe we want to increase the bend on our prongs. Okay, we could make more changes to improve upon this. Maybe we want to make the bezels, the diameter, smaller. We'd use our prong diameter top to change the diameter of the top here. Okay, but I'm just going to leave this as it is for now. Well, actually, maybe I want to bring my under bezel, the whole wire setting, down a little bit. Okay, so I can use my elevation, or I could use my bezel origin. Okay, so that's the wire setting. Okay, so you will want to come in and play around with these for yourself to get a feel for the settings, but as you can see we get quite nice results here. So we can set our stones in many different ways, and we'll be looking at some of our prong settings up here later on in the lesson. Okay, we just covered these three now. Again, we've also seen how to place our stones, our place stone commands, and our special gemstone creators. Okay, these are good for creating center stones and accent stones, but we'll be looking at our pave commands later on in the lesson that allow us to pave a surface with many gems in one go. Okay, but now we're going to move on to our inquire tools, where we can find out the weights of the different parts of our designs. We can inquire weights, gemstone types, cuts, etc. Okay, so first let's erase some of these parts. Okay, so we can set our entity filter to all. We could do control picks to pick those that we want to erase. Okay, so we left click on the mask holding down the control key, and then we can left click on the erase command. Alternatively, if we left click on the erase prior to selecting, okay, this is going to activate that command. We won't have an options panel, an input manager pop up. However, we will be able to begin picking different entities, okay, and we're not, in this case, holding down the control key. Okay, however, if we do hold down the control key, we are able to unpick items from our selection. So it's sometimes hard to tell whether you or not you are within the erase command because there is no input manager. But one way of knowing is that you can pick multiple entities without using the control pick. Okay, and then we middle click to carry out the erase command, like so. Okay, so now we're going to come into our tools and cutters ribbon tab. Okay, here are our cutters, and this part we have our tools. Okay, so at the left of this panel we have our inquire commands and our bill of materials command. So let's first take a look at our inquire stone command. If we left click on here, we are brought into the input manager where we are prompted to pick a stone. Now our stones all come in as component entities. Okay, and this tool will read components. Okay, it will not read shapes. And the components will come in with their attributes pre-assigned because we assigned these during the command when we were placing the stones. So if we left click on our first tapered baguette, we can see in the materials panel that we assigned it to be an emerald. Okay. Also, we get a preview of its dimensions. Okay, so it has a top width of 6 mm, bottom width of 3, a length of 8, and we see its approximate carat weight, 0.9 carats. Okay, we can then left click on a different stone and see its attributes. Okay, so this is a white diamond, 1.45 carats. Okay, so this is how we can inquire the information about our stones, but only when they are components. If we merge these stones into shapes, we will no longer be able to use our inquire stone command on them. Okay, so for example, if we do choose to merge this emerald, okay, maybe we want to change the face attributes a bit. Remember, we saw this in a previous lesson. We can right click on a shape, come into the face attributes, play around with its attributes to get a different display of that shape. Again, like I said, for stones I sometimes like to increase the transparency to around 15. Play around with the other settings. Okay, we can get a transparency on our stone. Okay, we may wish to work like this. Okay, but when we do, we have merged it. Bear in mind that we can no longer inquire about this stone. Okay, and we'll also see that this has an effect when we come to use our bill of materials. Okay, so next up we can inquire metals. Okay, now unlike our inquire stone, the inquire metal command performs only on shapes. Okay, now all of these are components, we cannot pick them. So we must first merge our components, making them into shapes. Okay, but if we want to make modifications to these components using our tweak tool, now our tweak tool will only work on actual components, so we must make our modifications prior to merging these components. So we can use our tweak tool, for example, on this bezel. Okay, we left click to pick the bezel, but then we must, when we're in this editor, we must left click on this icon to bring up the attributes of that component. Okay, and then we can play around, make our modifications here. Okay, so once we've made our modifications, then we should merge our components. And I'm not actually going to merge this one, just so we can see the effect it has during our bill of materials command. So we're going to merge these as base. Okay, these are now shapes. This one isn't. Back in our Tools and Cutters tab, we come into our Inquire Metal command, left click. It's going to bring up this pop-out window. We can then pick a shape. Okay, so let's pick our ring shank. Okay, we can then assign a material. Let's say gold 18 karat yellow, and then we'll have our information down here about the total weight of that shape in two forms. Okay, so we're getting the mass readout of this shape. Okay, we can pick other materials, say silver. Okay, we're going to get a readout for the mass of this shape were it to be created out of silver. Okay, so these are our inquire commands. So for stones, make sure you inquire whilst they're components. For metals, make sure you inquire when your components have been merged into shapes. Okay, now we come into our bill of materials command. If we left click in here, it's going to bring up our pop-out dialog report. Okay, now the aim here is to have all of our metals at the top in this top table and all of our stones in the bottom table. Okay, at the moment it seems a bit mixed up and may look a little confusing. Okay, but what we have here is a list of our shapes and a list of our components. Okay, now you can see how our components have attributes already assigned to them. Okay, so our tapered baguette we can see it has already been assigned as an emerald gemstone, and we have its weight dimensions here. Now the emerald cut white diamond, we merged it, okay, so that we could play around with its face attributes. Now when we merged it, it became a shape and it lost its attributes that we assigned to it. So we can see which shape it is within our report by left clicking on the stone. Okay, it is our shape 1. Okay, we have the volume for it, but we do not have its gemstone and other attributes. Okay, because we merged it. So it is generally best to do your bill of materials prior to merging any stones. Okay, but we can assign the gemstone back to it by right clicking on it in the fields, assign gemstone. We can assign the gemstone to it. Okay, we had it as a white diamond. Left click OK. Then you saw the shape S1 be removed from our metal table, and we have it down here in our stone table. Okay, now we can pick our shapes or our components from within the windows or in here. Okay, so we can pick our shank. I'm assuming this shape 2 is our shank because it has the greatest volume. Left click. Okay, now I want to assign it a material. I want to assign it a metal. So we right click, assign metal. Let's say 18 karat yellow. And when I left click OK, watch it disappear from our gemstones area, and we'll have it only in our metals area. Okay, like so. Okay, so now we have another shape, one more shape, and that is our emerald bezel. So we left click, okay, and this is our shape 3. We can right click, assign metal, silver. Okay, so we're getting all of our metals up here and keeping our gemstones down here. Okay, finally we have our bezel baguette. Okay, this is a component because we didn't merge it. Okay, and you can see how it is expressed differently as a component in our bill of materials compared to the bezel that we did merge. Okay, but we can still assign it a material. Okay, and then when we assign it a metal, it pops up into the top here. Okay, so this is what we want to see. All of our stones in the bottom section and all of our metals in the top part. Okay, and then we have a complete bill of materials. Okay, but to reiterate again, do not merge your stones. If you do choose to merge them, that is, do not merge them prior to performing our bill of materials. Okay, and once we have this sorted, we can choose a logo. Okay, your own company logo. It needs to be a similar resolution to the JCD logo that is already in use. But this logo will be thrown in when we create our bill of materials. Okay, so we left click on generate bill of materials, and this is going to create a file, an RTF file format, a bill of materials with your logo that you selected in there. Okay, and this will create it in the folder that you specify. Okay, and this RTF file, it can be read by word processors. Okay, so this is our bill of materials command, and it helps us get a readout of the various materials we have within a design. Okay, so maybe it's something the customer will want to see, or the manufacturer, or simply for your own records.